Hello, everyone, and welcome to V.A.C. Roundtable number 87. And we've got a special one for you today. We're joined by a gentleman who doesn't need really much of any introduction to those who have followed the Grateful Dead over the years. Needless to say, it is he keeps them alive. And basically, by keeping alive with his stories and what is actually what has transpired. And so we're joined by Big Steve Parish. Of course, he is on Sirius XM or XM Radio, and that is on Thursdays at 1400 PST or 1700 EST for the Big Steve Hour. That's again on XM Radio. So I can't thank you enough for joining us today, Big Steve. But we're honored to have you, and we're going to get right into it straight off the bat. So,
Okay.
with that being done, the first question is one we ask everybody, and that is, how did you originally come to cannabis? And this is kind of a multi-tier question. You know, you can
Sure.
tell us how you were originally turned on, but then, of course, you it became part of your life and lifestyle. So, how did you know when that became? So, thank you and welcome.
Well, it was in 1965, man. I'm an old timer. And in that year, I was 15 years old. And I got involved in the strangest way because um, there was a gal, and she and I were hanging out in the park where we all hung out. And uh, we started kissing. And her name was Patty. And then I realized, hey, she has a boyfriend. His name was Kevin O'Keefe. And so he heard about it, and it was no two ways about it. He wanted to fight. And so he came over, and we got into it. And I was raised to fight too. And so we got right into it. And then it was pretty much a draw. He didn't want to take it too far. But then he says to me, hey, I got something you might be interested in. So he takes me down this alley, climbs over a fence, and there's some ivy growing there on the ground. And he reaches under there and pulls out an aluminum foil package, right? Tin foil. And he opens it up, and there's marijuana in there. And it was kind of gnarly looking. It had seeds in those days. This is way back, but it was Panama red. It was strong, man. It was dark and strong. And so we roll up a couple of them, and I say, well, what's this going to do to me? And he says, you're going to feel like you're in a helicopter, man. I said, well, I've never been in a helicopter. So what's that going to make me feel like? He said, oh, you'll see. And so we start smoking, and we start chatting and talking. We're hanging out, and we become friends. And he says, by the time we're done, he says to me, anytime I'm going to show you. I showed you where I stashed it. So anytime you want to smoke some of this, help yourself, right? Well, I help myself every freaking day, man. As soon as I could in the afternoon, I'd get to that pack. And before I realized it, I'd smoked it all, right? And now he's looking for me for that. He goes, what'd you smoke all my weed for? And so we about got into it again almost, but we were okay. We remained friends. And then I was mad for it after that. I really have always been high strung, and it did something for me that I felt right away that was almost a relaxation and seeing the world in a whole new way. The enlightenment that opens up your mind. We always were taught that it takes your brain to the seventh bardo. And that's what we were calling it. Same thing with any psychedelic. Your brain opens up these other floors in the elevator that's inside your brain. And from that moment on, and then, of course, a couple of years later, now Vietnam is raging, man, raging. All my buddies are going, and we're all getting called up because we were a bunch of fuck ups who didn't go to school. And so my parents told me, you better go just do your duty, man. It'll make a man of you, all that stuff. And my buddy, Bing Marquis, he volunteered right away and he goes over, and he comes back and He opens up his duffel bag right off the plane, man, and he has a jar of Vietnamese weed. Now, that was really what Thai weed was. It was from Vietnam. And we started smoking that, and I was fucking loving it, man. It was the strongest weed, you know. And in those days, you bought your weed in what was called a nickel bag, you know, these little envelopes of seeds and stems and everything in it, but it was strong. You know, this stuff that they talk now about how, oh, weed's so much stronger now. Bullshit. It isn't, man. It was always, those strains were so pure. And then I run into the Grateful Dead. And at the same time that all this is happening, they're forming, you know, they started in 1965 and as the Warlocks. And so now in San Francisco, they're starting to play and become famous. And I was standing out in front of the Brady Alley where I live and saw a guy unloading a truck. And I just went over to help him. I was actually out there smoking a joint. I walked across there and I helped him. He was struggling with a bass cabinet. I just helped him. And he said to me, "Hey, thank you. Come on in here." And he takes me in. I didn't know that I lived across the street from Pacific High Recording. And that was where the Grateful Dead were at that time doing Working Man's Dead. And so I started helping him. His name was Ramrod. And Johnny Hagan was his partner. They both had come down from Pendleton with the pranksters and were working for the band and doing their equipment. And I always tell people I got my job with them because of drugs, because Johnny had taken that morning STP. STP was a 4-day acid trip, man, and it was real. And Owsley was a sound man of the Grateful Dead. He was making it. And Ramrod was living at Owsley's house, and he takes me over there, and that was the start of it. And Bear just said, "Well, you got to take the acid test right now." And he starts hanging out. Now, in his backyard, there was a mountain lion. A guy had next door neighbor had a mountain lion in a cage. And so we're on this acid, and Bear was his nickname. Owsley we called Bear. He always wanted us to call him Bear, never to use his name. And when we were out traveling or anything. And so he and I become pretty good friends. And he starts telling me over the fireplace in this house. It was in the Oakland Hills in Kensington. And Bob Thomas, who actually is the guy who did this, what I'm wearing, which I've worn since that day when I was given it. Uh, it's the Grateful Dead enlightened skull with the lightning bolt in the skull. And that stands for the enlightenment of your mind, opening it up. And so he tell Bob Thomas was a painter and an artist, and he lived there with Owsley, and he had painted a tree of life coming up out of the fireplace. And so Owsley said, "If you get too high, because I gave you a big dose to see who you were," and he said, "just stare at that tree and follow it." And that became a thing we did. If you got too high, we called it oak tree therapy. Even outside, when we were out in the oak studded hills of California, we just stare at an oak tree if you were getting too high. And it's some cerebral thing happens where you actually could balance yourself out. Now, I get in trouble. I go down, and that day they're taking every fourth guy Marine, and I happen to be a fourth guy. And when we got down to Pendleton, the fucking drill sergeant goes, "Who the fuck are these guys that didn't fucking volunteer for this?" And so everybody takes a step back, and we're about 5 of us are out front. And he goes to the rest of the guys, "Beat the fuck out of them." And they just started beating us, man. And so I started smuggling weed into Pendleton, and they didn't like it, Camp Pendleton, and they did not like that. So it got me in the brig pretty quick. And thank goodness, in the long run, now I realize it actually got me dishonorable discharge. But because they were scared, they were telling us at that time, "Oh, it makes you a pacifist." And then other times they're telling us stories that it makes you a killer. Guy took an axe and killed his whole family, smoked a joint, this kind of shit. And so, which was it? Are we pacifist on it? Now, I love history, ATN. I love history. So I always read nonfiction. Now, if you've ever heard of the Battle of Undulaine and Rorke's Drift, that was the Zulu Wars. The British fought against the Zulus, right? And the British, I start reading about it, and the British, they had the Henry Martini repeating rifles, man. And the Zulus had their assegais, these big spears, right? And they weren't afraid to charge the line. And each one of them had a vial around his neck. They since have done archaeological digs on these battlefields in South Africa, and everybody had pure resin, just like the dab you're doing, around their neck in a little vial. And they were smoking pure THC, and they were eating red mushrooms to get them pissed off. They were feared of nothing, man. And the thing is that I start realizing, in my travels, to go and be part of the Grateful Dead, we were very lucky, ATN, because everybody in the world came to Haight Ashbury, and there were some of them that were smugglers, and they brought to us the finest weed. Here I fall into the best place ever for weed. And Housley, I never was able to. I wrote about it in my book, but we never talked about any of the stuff that we did, in that way, the clandestine stuff. And so I get busted for selling some acid right directly to a cop. And they were, in those days, it just become illegal in 66, right? And they telling me, this is 68 now, and they're telling me, you're going to prison for 20 fucking years, you dummy. And I go, what? Now, my father was a pretty tough guy, and he was a Teamster, and he worked his way up, fought his way up through the Teamsters. He'd done time. He done big time, man, 5 years of his life. And he saw it in me, and he says, you are fucking your life up, man. But what he did, he paid a judge 5 grand, and the judge let me go on YO because I was 18, youthful offender, no probation, nothing. We're going down the courthouse steps. My father kicked me in the ass so hard I fell down the steps. He says, now what are you going to do, you dummy? That was your college money. I go, I'm going right back to the Grateful Dead. What do you think? And went back, and that was the best thing. From that point on, I never exchanged money for drugs to anybody. I didn't have to because we were living in a world where it all came to us. So now you got everybody coming back from Vietnam in those days came right to the shows. And we noticed something that we had to deal with people freaking out on psychedelics. And they would come, they'd strip their clothes off, and you'd see them running. There was no barricades, there was no security guys. It was us, the roadies. There was Ramrod, myself, Jackson, Kid, Healy. And we had to take care of all this stuff, and people were constantly freaking out. Now, when these guys were coming back from combat zones, they were taking acid and they were losing their minds, because they were having flashbacks, they were having PTSD and all this stuff. But one of our guys, Danny, he said, hey, look, if we just hug the guy when he's freaking out. And by God, that worked. They actually calmed down. That's when we started this thing called Haight Ashbury Free Clinic at every show. Bill Graham contributed. We had doctors there when people were getting too crazy. Because if the police got you, they took you and they shot you up with Thorazine, which was horrible. You couldn't move. You froze your body, and your mind is going 1,000 miles an hour. That is not cool. So anyway, we're living in this world of drug, and the weed was great, man. And most of it was this incredible Mexican weed, ATN, that this guy named Howard Wales, he was a keyboard player. He was from a band called AB Sky. He played in a band called the Trashmen, which actually had a song called The Bird is a Word, Surfing Bird, way back. Anyway, he was from the Midwest, and he'd been in the Navy, and we had a lot to talk about. And Jerry picks me because I was the youngest guy on the crew at the time, and we worked at a place called Alembic. Owsley was a true alchemist, and Alembic is the word for alchemy. And so he was always experimenting. He used to grow DMT in a jar on a stick, in this liquid solution that he made up. And when he put that long, it was like a long Q-tip kind of that went through a hole in the top of the mason jar. And then you'd watch it in 2 days. This stuff would grow up the stick and it smelled like hell. And it was like weird consistency of plasticky bubble gum. So we'd break off pieces and smoke it in a pipe. And that was an instantaneous. As soon as you inhaled it and held it, you got high big time. You were Russian purple, man, right away. And the band would turn around and look at us on stage because when they smelled that DMT, this is what they knew. Something was going to happen with the equipment. So electricity started playing strange trips every time we lit up DMT. It would either an amp would blow out, or you'd see the tubes turning cherry red and shorting out. You see we lived in a world of electricity. You leaned on an amplifier and you got a shock. And nothing was grounded. That was something Owsley figured out, and we were the first band to start grounding everything. Now, what I'm trying to tell you by all this is that the use of cannabis, the use of psychedelics, made us so that we thought outside the box. You know that stuff about I hated that stuff when people said, "Oh yeah, I'm stoners." Stoners get lost; they don't know where their car is. All that bullshit. I never saw anybody act that way. Instead, they either, if they had a good time, they got focused on something, and we started focusing on sound and the equipment that we were living with. And I'm really proud of what we accomplished, man. Even though we were stoned all the time, you see, you could do anything you wanted in the Grateful Dead. You could wake up in the morning, and guys did it too. They'd pop open a bottle of wild turkey and drown the whole thing down their throat. But guess what? By noon, they were worthless. They were fucking worthless. Did you want to work on a scaffolding at 35 feet in the air with a guy who, we had to hold on with our feet and lift these cabinets up there, man? We were strong and we were tough, man. And I realized something that the crew was formed of the Grateful Dead by Jerry Garcia. He realized he would hang out with us every day. And it was made up of myself, a city guy from San Francisco, and Kid was from Alameda. And the other guys were from little towns up in Pendleton and in Oregon, Hermiston, Echo, and they were real cowboys. And they were tough, and they were psychedelic rangers too now. And all of us together taught each other. I was able to teach those guys how you live in cities, man. They had no idea. And we had to travel everywhere. The band traveled with us. We drove everywhere we went around the country. No GPS, no cell phones. I tell people, they say, "What? How'd you get down?" We knew how to read maps, I tell them. And sometimes we didn't have a map. We were too macho to ask for help. We get lost all the time. But what a great country America was. Now, the rednecks were everywhere, man. And they didn't like us, man. We're smoking weed, we're wearing tie dyes, and we got our hair long, And right away, we come to these truck stops, and the truckers were good, some of them, because that's where we got our speed, bennies, benzodrine, black beauties, amphetamines, you name it, because you had to stay awake. We didn't stop. We just drove cross country and we took turns driving and sleeping in the truck and stopping to get something to eat. And so we became these road warriors, man. And we weren't going to not ever not be without weed, man. So Howard Wales brought us all this great weed. He brought it up from Mexico, right? And it was grown in those days by indigenous peoples. And we knew all the weed by the states of Mexico, Sinaloa, Michoacan, you know, all Lake Chapala, wherever the location of where the weed was grown or came from, you could rely on it. And it was gorgeous. It was lime green with red seed caps. It had seeds. The Mexicans always left some males in their fields. And so we had seeds. So we always kept those seeds and stored them. Now, at this very time, you can ask me another question in a minute. I'll stop on this trip about how drugs affected us. But that's what we did all day long. Jerry, Garcia, he'd buy a pound of tie sticks or something like that, and just he'd reach in and give us all some weed. And so we always had pot, man. And we were very lucky in that way. Now, Nixon decides that he don't like us, man. He don't like the Grateful Dead. He doesn't like people that aren't voting for him, and he doesn't like people that are young. So what he does, he takes Operation Intercept. He takes all the gear. Vietnam was sort of coming down a little bit, and he took all the gear and put it on the border to intercept. Operation Intercept was to stop the Mexican weed from coming into California. And they did a pretty good job, man. It dried up. So we had seeds. So Jerry, we lived up in Stinson Beach, all of us at this time. We just migrated there. The crew, the band, we all had houses up in there. We pretty much ran the town, right? So in the time of this, there was um, secret gardens were starting because we had all these seeds. We just started saying, let's grow some. So Mountain Girl, who was Jerry's old lady at the time, she started with the first really, she grew some great weed, and then she started teaching me and the rest of us how to grow really good pot. So we started doing that. Now we're on the road all the time too. And when we go places like, especially New York, where everybody was mob related, okay, every promoter in the country was mobbed up, man. I can tell you all the stories of every one of them. Now, my father, like I say, he was involved in all that too. So he knew a lot about that stuff. But what happened was Colombian weed now replaced it, right? And Colombian weed was great, man. Chocolate, um, Santa Marta Gold, which was beautiful, man. Black seeds and weed that looked gold. It was gold. On my radio show, a guy called me up a few months ago and he said, "Hey, I got one of the original strains of weed." I said, "Yeah, which one?" He said, "Acapulco Gold." And I had to laugh at him. I said, "Acapulco Gold was not a strain." You see, around Acapulco in Mexico, they dried their weed a different way than anybody else. They laid giant tarps out in the sun and they threw the weed in piles and they let it dry in the hot sun. It turned gold. It turned brown as the chlorophyll and the leaves it. That's the first thing, and the trichromes start popping out. It's amazing the transformation that uh, it's so important to cure weed really good. That's the real trick. You can grow it, but you better know how to cut it, trim it, and dry it and let it cure. You wait 3 months and then it's the strongest. And it keeps getting stronger. And so we learned all these techniques. And so now we've got so much pot. We are the people, we get famous for it. And so we're getting popped everywhere we go. We're getting arrested, especially, in the South, in the North, in the East, in the West, and everywhere. Cops were on the prowl, and they didn't like, if you had long hair and you're driving, you're speeding, you'd make a mistake, you'd make a wrong turn, they pull you over. We smoked all the time. And so we had to get arrested. But the band always stuck with us, man. They never let us deal with that alone. They took care of us. They got lawyers. They always bailed us out. And that was a beautiful thing. You we knew all the bands, man. And we were the ones going out there now. And the Grateful Dead, you see, we didn't sell records because the band played these long improvisational jams. And so records companies wouldn't didn't like us. And plus, Jerry was letting people record our shows. I tell you, that freaked out the record companies. Now, everything we did then, ATN, became the way to deal with rock and roll, man. Everything we did now is the way they do it. There was no PAs, man. There was just these things called A1s in every movie theater. It had one 12-inch speaker and a big box built around it. And that was the PA at Woodstock. It was two of those on each side. That's all. You got 500,000 people. We start thinking. We start thinking all the time, man. We were strong and we were ready and we weren't afraid, man. And we went out there, stuck our chins out. That's why Garcia, he loved the crew and he actually helped us invent ourselves. There was no other band that had that relationship with the guys, man, because we did everything to get that show on the road. And he knew we weren't going to be turned back, man. And those days too, at 11:30. You were in the Civic Center. You see, when you start in showbiz with playing music, you play in nightclubs first. You start on a Wednesday. They'll give you a Wednesday. If you sell out the Wednesdays after a while, you move to the weekends. Then if you sell those out, all of a sudden now you can move to slightly bigger halls. There was the Longshoremen's Hall in San Francisco. And Bill Graham was coming up with the Fillmore. And these places, Bill wouldn't let the cops in Winterland or Fillmore. So it was all a party. It was the greatest party ever, man. And everybody was stoned out of their fucking gourds. But we constantly kept evolving and learning. We didn't just stand around and do nothing when we were high. We built motorcycles. We rode motorcycles everywhere, except on the road. We never could, but we wanted to. But anyway, it was a life of freedom of the highest order, man. And of course, after Altamont, Jerry said, "Hey, I said, Jerry, what are we going to do, man? Everybody's turning their back on the Angels, the Hell's Angels." And he said, "They were our friends before, they're our friends now, and we're going to just keep it that way." And so they were a great source of cannabis too. They loved to smoke, most of them. And we would get stoned and take these rides, man. It was a feeling of amazing power. They build us motorcycles. They'd steal our bikes and then we'd get it back because they were the ones that stole them. And so it was an amazing life, man, and drug fueled like unbelievable. But we still did these amazing things. So we started building these PAs. And the wall of sound was Owsley's idea. It was built on the 35-foot standing bass wave for Phil Lesh to play. And that's why we stuck with that. And it was the biggest, it had 75 speakers. I'm starting to forget now, but we had like about, excuse me, it was 75 Mac 2300s, and we had about 114 speakers, man, in the whole stacks. Each guy had his stack of his gear, and then it went directly out to the audience. The idea was to make a PA that had an integral sound that the audience could really have a good time with. It sounded better than anything, but it wasn't practical. It about killed us dragging that thing around, man. It was so much work. And only four of us did it, man. We put it up every day as long as the scaffolding was right. People tell me, "Oh, you guys had two crews, right?" I go, "No, we never had two crews. There was two scaffolding crews that had to go ahead to make sure the scaffolding had to be exactly right or we couldn't put it up." So no one ever got hurt in our shows, man. All those stone crazy freaks jumping up, trying to grab the band guys. We grabbed them too, but we knew how to hold them. We never had to hurt people. Once in a while, you had to, give somebody a shot when they were punching back at you. You had to do something like that, but never did we hurt anybody. And that was the beauty of it, man, because you can be in a place, no matter what people tell you, your intelligence does not go away no matter how high you get. And you can figure stuff out. Give me another question. Come on, because otherwise I'm just going to keep raving, man.
Right on. Well, Tony Landry, council member. You have our next question.
Thank you, ATN. Steve,
Hey,
fascinating story. And I'm enjoying listening to it. I have a cannabis question. Can can you
okay,
can you share the story behind the Egyptian Kush cultivar from 1978?
sure, sure. That's a really great story, man. We're the only band, Tony, that went to play at the Great Pyramid. It happened. If I told you how incredible it was, some friends of ours went to Egypt and on a trip and they came back and said, "You guys got to go there, man. It's incredible." Now, at that time, there were wars in that area, big wars, because the greatest hash came from the Bekaa Valley and Red Lebanese. The Grateful Dead wrote songs about it. Red Lebanese and gold Lebanese, that's what we smoked, man. And also, Afghani hash was strong as there was, man. The Afghani surfboards, man. So we knew the world, every culture in the world had cannabis, right? So we had to go through changes, man. At that time, the King Tut exhibit was traveling around the United States, and it was, in 1922, Howard, um, what's the guy's name? Lord Carnarvon. He discovered a only tomb that was never raided by raiders in the desert, right outside of Cairo. And so that was King Tut's tomb. And they found gold death masks, gold everything, gold chariots, golden chairs, golden tables, man. Everything was gold that you saw on the trip that they brought out around the United States. And the State Department, the name was the Malones, these two people from the State Department, they had to teach us. They said, the State Department said, okay, Jimmy Carter was president, and we had smoked weed at the White House with his son. Man, we'd go there after the show in Washington. We had connections that got us in there at night. We'd go into the White House and smoke weed on the roof, man, when Carter was president. We did it later with Reagan right in the fucking Oval Office. I got pictures of it, man. But anyway, so they start telling us you got to learn the culture of this country because at that time there was peace accords in Washington. Sadat and I think his name was Begin from Israel. They were sitting down and talking peace. So they let us go. They said, okay, you guys can go and play at the pyramids, but you got to build a soccer field for the people at Mina Village outside of Cairo. That's where the pyramids are. It's called Mina Village. And we stayed at the Mina house, okay? Now, Cairo was the most insane place in the world, man. There was no traffic lights. There's no freaking stop signs. You go into that place and you see taxis driving every which way, beep, 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 going past each other, every direction. There's no arrows telling you where your street is. And you see a little kid walking by with a water buffalo, barely a toddler, man. You see camels loaded with straw to the top. I realized what they meant by the straw that broke the camel's back, man. I mean, it was like that. So one day we're setting up to play at the Great Pyramid of Cheops, okay? And that was really a challenge, man. We had to figure out first to get our gear over there. We brought about 50 tons of equipment, man. It was tough, man. I mean, getting it out of customs was incredible, man. And trying to get it set up took us days. We stayed there for weeks before to get the feel of the place. Okay. So inside the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, there's a great room in the middle of it, man. There's a big sarcophagus in there that's empty, but that was the king's chamber, they call it, right? And there was a hole that went from the outside of the pyramids down into that chamber. And so we always did this at shows. We record the band while they were playing, and we ran microphones into we build echo chambers out of cases, Leslie speaker cases, which are big, for B3 organ speakers. We would put microphones under there, and we did this thing all the time. We find a room and use it for an echo chamber and also a remote recording thing. Well, we ran cables down into the chamber, and Garcia was with us. It was me, Ramrod, John Cutler, and Dan Healy. We were trying to make this work, something we did all the time. And the for some reason, and we were saying, why is it not working? We couldn't get a signal to the recording truck. It was insane. Everything was right. We were testing all the cables. We knew what we were doing, but it wouldn't work, man. We're getting frustrated now. And Ken Kesey was the head of the Merry Pranksters and a genius, man. He wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Sometimes a Great Notion. And he was with us. The Pranksters, us, were tight and everything was great, man. They were the most amazing people. And so they went with us to Egypt. So did the Hells Angels. So did all our friends. We took a big crowd of people there. So Jerry and Kesey are with me, and we're getting tired of this thing not working. So I said, hey, let's go over to the Cairo Museum. So Jerry and Kesey and myself, we had a guy named Wahab, and he was our taxi driver because you didn't want to drive in Cairo, like I explained it to you earlier. So he would take us places like that, and he would go on runs and get us ice, which is really hard to find in Egypt, man. And everybody in the whole country, little kids, old people, had hash and they sold it to you wherever you went. Hashish, hashish, hashish. And they had hubbly bubblies all over. They smoked it because you see, in the Muslim religion, you're forbidden alcohol, but you can smoke all the weed you want. The same thing with the whole area, the whole Holy Land was where the greatest weed was grown. That is why Canaan is called as cannabis. That's the root of cannabis, Canaan, where Moses brought. See, they weren't slaves in Egypt; they were mercenary soldiers. The reason the Jews went out into the desert for it was 40 years because they built two um, generations of fighters and soldiers, and then they went and conquered Canaan, the Battle of Jericho. Joshua took over. Moses was never allowed to cross in there. Now, the people of had hash everywhere, but I never saw a joint, never saw any marijuana. But we couldn't go anywhere without pot. We smuggled some in a way. We cleaned it up, and we had a bunch of it. So we'd roll some joints up and smoke them. So we'd go to the Cairo Museum, me and Jerry and Kesey. And now I told you, we'd seen the gold mass of Tut at all over the United States. They took us to see that exhibit. We had to go to San Francisco to the De Young Museum, and we saw all the gold and stuff that he was buried with. Now in Egypt, we're in the Cairo Museum. We can't believe it, man. We're seeing mummies. We're going through Ramses' mummy right there, and then I see a room, and it's King Tut. It says over it. So we go in there, me and Kesey and Jerry, and this was the stuff, not the gold stuff. This was the everyday stuff of his life, and it was all there. I mean, he was buried with about so many animals, man. There was mummified cats in jars. There was mummified leopards. There was mummified ibises. Birds of every kind of animal was there mummified. And an interesting thing, a side note, people might find interesting. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it's a sick book, man, written 6,000 years ago. And we knew about it in the Haight-Ashbury. And in the first chapter of that book, it says, the sled of the dead will be pulled by the grateful dead in the afterlife. So that blew our minds. Now, years later, when we got back from Egypt, some scholars, friends of ours, went and started reading the whole thing. You see, because most of it's about mummification, the whole middle part of it. And they find in the last chapter, this is what it said, Tony. It said, 25 years before the dawning of the age of Aquarius, the grateful dead will make a great noise at the pyramid. Now, how the fuck did they know that? Write that 6,000 years before we even thought about going there. I'm telling you, it was some kind of destiny. Okay. So we're in that room with all of King Tut's everyday items, man. Really no gold at all, just regular items like spinning wheels and different furniture and things that, utensils that you would have. So we see this case. And I go, holy shit, Gary, come here. Garcia's over on this side of me. Kesey's over here. Look, it was a big basket of cannabis sativa seeds, right? Unbelievable, man. I said, Jared, look, he couldn't even go to the afterlife without his cannabis. He was buried with a fucking big basket of seeds, man. So we leave there, and I'm thinking about that. I couldn't get it out of my mind. Now, Wahab was our taxi driver, a great guy, funny guy. Man, we'd have jokes with him every day, but he could find stuff. So I take out a joint. I hold it up, man. I say, Wahab, this is marijuana. This is marijuana. He goes, oh, he says to me, is good for sex? Mr. Steve, is good for sex? I said, it's the best in the world. It's the best thing ever for sex, man. And we want some. Somewhere in this country, there's seeds out there because all the people have all this hash. Now, a hash plant is a squat little strong indica plant, man. Powerful weed, man. It grows in the hottest climates. It grows in Afghanistan in the mountains. It grows in Morocco and grows in. And when people collected hash in those days, they probably still do. They stripped naked a guy, a runner, a young runner would go out when the plants were ripe, and he puts a collar on, and from that collar are hanging long, long leather belts almost to the ground. And he runs through the fields. And on those leather straps, all the resin, the strong resin, gets caked on those things. Then he takes it back to the main house and they scrape it and they scrape it. Now, Wahab took off. He said, "Okay, I'll find some seeds for you." And he left. I didn't see him for 2 or 3 days. And then he comes back and he finds me on the stage. We were getting close to starting the first night of shows. And he has a vial, a wooden jar, like, carved. He opens the top, and in there is about 100 seeds. And those seeds were ancient strains, man. You know, um, so what we did, it was we smuggled some back to the United States when we got home. Now this was 1978, and we knew people at this time. Homegrown had become a big thing in California. You see, where we live in Northern California is the same as Afghanistan. If you go around the world, it's the 38th parallel. We didn't know that, but we found all this out, and we were able to grow strong indica weeds. It's not a good place to grow sativas. We started trying to grow sativa because a lot of the Mexican weed was sativa, and we had a lot of seeds of that. But it didn't take well in the growing season in Northern Cal. But indica grew great. And so anyway, we knew some friends, Rod Green, Oli, a couple other people. They had farms in Sonoma, Mendocino, and Humboldt. So we gave them some seeds. But here's the trick: we never grew it to sell. We only kept it for ourselves. And every 4 years, we made more seeds. People ask me, Big Steve, how did you guys keep it alive all this time? Because we grew seeds off it, because we always let some males grow, just like we'd been taught. And we were able to keep it going, and we never got commercial with it. See, once you had a strain that people were growing and you were selling it, then came the helicopters, then came the fucking DEA dropping right in your face and cutting your weed down, arresting you, destroying your freaking house. And we weren't trying to do that. So we only smoked it for ourselves. Now, when Jerry died, and then years go by, and then I meet the guys from this company called Grizzly Peak. And I brought those seeds to them, and they crossed them with a London pound cake. And that made an incredible old strain of weed that is so fucking strong. And so that became the Big Steve pre-rolls and all the Big Steve Egyptian Kush flowers that we sold at Grizzly Peak. And we were able to really keep the integrity of that strain going. And I'm really proud of that. And um, that weed is the number one pre-roll in California. People love it, man. And we kept the THC high in there, really a high level. And it's just an amazing strain, man. And it's not easy to keep a strain alive because when they came to bust you, that was their main thing. The DEA did was to destroy strains. They were smart. They hated cannabis, man. Sworn enemies of cannabis. When we're the fucking warriors of psychedelia, and we fucking butted heads all the time. And so to have that now weed to be legal, it's mind blowing. To have joints with my name on it. Wow. Unbelievable, man. having to be locked up. When kids tell me, "Oh, Big Steve, it's all corporate weed now, man." I said, "Oh yeah, have you ever been to jail?" No. I said, "Well, that's a corporation right there. You don't want to mess with, man." So if it's legal, understand there's going to be a lot of problems. They tax the shit out of it. They fuck with us all the time. They won't let you use, anything but cash to pay for it, making it ridiculous. This country is not going to take it off Schedule One. Nixon put it on Schedule One because it was worthless to be used for medicine. Are you kidding me? In 1888, the British Raj was in India. Now, India is some of the strongest weed in the world, man. It comes from Afghanistan and up in that part of what they call the Hindu Kush and also down into India. It was all part of the same thing. And those people are tough. I don't need to tell you guys. I mean, the British couldn't beat them. The Russians couldn't beat them. Nobody could because they are fucking crazy. But they grew cannabis at the in the mountains because they couldn't grow rice, and they ate the seeds. They lived on the seeds, and seeds are very healthy for you. There's no THC in them. They're high in omega threes, and they're healthy for you. And Greece, you go in Greece, I couldn't believe it. There's cannabis seeds everywhere because they roast them and they salt them and people eat them like a snack. Every culture in the world has got their own strains of cannabis.
All right, Steve, we're going to get to our next question. Thank you for that breakdown on the Egyptian. Next up will be Michael Crowitz.
Go, Mike.
I'm sorry, Dan. But hey there, Big Steve. This has
Hey,
been phenomenally cool. This is like sitting around the fire and like oral tradition. It's pretty cool. It's heartwarming. But I do have a follow-up question before I ask my question. I'm sorry, I just got to ask. Whatever happened to the problem with the mics and the amps and the speakers over there in Egypt? What was the
no, the
bug? How'd
mics
you
and
get it working?
the speakers and the amps and everything worked on the stage. We just couldn't get that echo chamber to work. We couldn't get the microphone to work in that chamber. There's some force above man in there that won't allow it, man. You got to believe that there's magic in those places, man. You
Wow.
see, when they first built those things, they were covered with a facing stone of polished high gloss, man. They shined in the sun. When you fly in and you see those things, you can't believe that man built these things. They're giant, man. They look like something that you can see from space, man. And
Wow.
so you realize this is heavy duty. And we were hanging out there. I climbed the pyramid. You could climb the pyramids because once they took all when the Muslims took over Egypt, they stripped them down and built all their mosques in Cairo and all around from that marble that was on the pyramids as a fascia. So once you had these holes where you could go right in to the chamber, there's no reason it shouldn't work for us to hang a microphone and to get an echo of the sound that we were sending in there, catch the echo chamber, and then send it back to the recording truck to record it. It wouldn't fucking work. I can't tell you why, but everything else worked fine. We did a week's worth of shows, full eclipse of the moon, unbelievable, man. And we're
Wow.
playing right on the Sahara Desert, man. If you went off the stage steps, you were right in the desert. There was the Sahara Desert right there. And so it was quite an experience. But okay, that's that one question. What's your
Yeah,
other
man. So yeah. So this, I guess you call this a marijuana movement question, right? So we some of our Veterans Action Council members, including myself, have been aficionados of some of the vintage pins and posters and stuff of the early marijuana movement. And just recently, we found a pin. It was from Lemar, legalized
right?
marijuana from like 1965, and the seller was talking
It
about
wasn't in
the Grateful
65,
Dead
man.
benefit. There was a benefit concert, I guess, in 1965 that the Grateful Dead
I don't know what
highlighted. I mean,
that never happened. In 1965, a benefit concert for weed? No
660,
way.
what was it? What year? Etienne, 66? I'm terrible with dates. So anyway, let me ask the question. So this is the thing, right? The seller of that pin pointed us to a picture of Pigpen with a Lemar pin, and it just got us thinking, the cannabis movement was so young then, there was a lot of influence, I think, both ways on the Grateful Dead. You talked about that, but like, what was, from your perspective, the Grateful Dead's influence on the cannabis movement? Like, how did the cannabis movement grow and become what it was because of the Grateful Dead, if you think it did?
Okay, well, here the answer to that question is very convoluted, of course, but Lemur, the pen that you're referring to was Pigpen. He collected pens. He didn't even smoke much pot. He was a drinker anyway, but um, he liked to collect pins and put them on his jacket, his vest, and so that's where that pin came from. It was a cool pin, and then that Amorpheus became the name of that, and that was a rolling paper that was the first really lightweight, beautiful rolling paper that had no chemicals in it. So we really liked Amorpheus. But we were so unpolitical, man. We didn't believe in the system, okay? We were so stupid. We didn't vote. 1974 is when it came to the ballot to make pot fully legal in California. Everything, no restrictions. You could grow as much as you wanted, you could do anything with it. It was beautiful. And we were all standing around Winterland that night, and somebody said, "Hey, it barely failed by just a few things." And we all looked around. None of us voted, and that's when we realized how stupid we'd been. And so we became active at that moment in 1974. And we'd already been doing our part by getting arrested all over the country and going everywhere with joints blazing, and we were a target. We had targets on our back, man. We were arrested all over the place. New Orleans didn't want us coming there and changing their style. So we knew a lot about the laws concerning pot, but didn't we didn't take part in the system. So after that time, we all registered to vote, hoping that it would come back again. What an opportunity we missed! It would have made it so different to make it legal in California in 74 with no restrictions. It was so different and grassroots type thing. So we became activists in what we loved, man. But we did our part by going everywhere and smoking it. My God, we played. I was starting to tell earlier about when we were in the civic centers at 11:30. The band would be playing, and you look around, and all of a sudden the cops would be filtering in. Boy, they would just be beating their billy clubs. If you didn't stop right at 11:30, they'd be watching that clock. They'd blow a whistle and they'd start beating the heads in the audience, man. We didn't like that. And so the first band, we knew how to take our electric distribution boxes where we plugged in to the quad boxes on the stage. We built those ourselves, and we tied in to the mains, man, and we put another padlock in a box on that. Drove the cops crazy. In those days, we had to fight them. We had to fight with them because it was not a felony to hit a cop. When they came for you in those days, they would say, "You gonna come with me, or you gonna fight?" If you wanted to fight, they were glad to fight too. They were tough boys, man. They were all World War II vets, man, and they fucking loved to fight the young long hairs, man. And so we got into a thing like that where we were fighting for cannabis all the time with the law, man. And we get arrested for that, and then the headlines in the paper would say Grateful Dead fight police for drugs. And one of the bad things with the whole drug scene was when the Colombian weed took over for the Mexican weed, which Nixon hated us so bad he made it Schedule One, like I'm saying, and then he stopped all the flow of weed coming to California. So the homegrown thing was going wild. We had it everywhere. We had more weed than ever before because they didn't have to smuggle it in, man. So the culture was growing. Now everybody was smoking pot. And the Colombians changed something. They said, you can buy our weed, but you got to take cocaine too. And they started putting cocaine in the loads, man. And all the smugglers would complain. They go, we don't want to deal with that shit, but they're making us, man. And then everything started changing. Once people got into cocaine, then all of a sudden, the whole drug culture changed everywhere. Everybody, because when you go up, you got to go down, So everybody was smoking a lot of weed, but they were also drinking now for the first time. None of us would touch alcohol. Now everybody's drinking. Everybody's fucking doing heroin, doing fucking strong narcotics, Tuinol, Secanols. They were all these drugs, hypnoticos. They were strong pills everywhere, man. Dardens. I spent my whole life exploring all the ways you can inebriate yourself, Tony. No, that's your name's not Tony. But anyway, your name's Mike. That's right. But the thing is that the culture started changing. Now, cannabis gets wrapped up in all these other drugs too. But that bullshit about it being a gateway drug, no, 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 man. It actually kept me off it. Everybody else is dead, man. They're all dead that play that game because you eventually die, man. But, everybody does. But the thing is that cannabis kept you alive, man, because I quit smoking cigarettes when I was 19 because I got a pound of weed and rolled it up. And we did that to quit smoking tobacco. And those people that just went to cannabis didn't get cancer. It has no cancer causing problems. It's an alkaline in your lungs.
All
It
right.
doesn't go into the lower lobes either.
Let's
But
get to another
tobacco
question.
is the
Like,
same. Yeah, give me another one.
all right, Leslie.
What time is it now? We getting on?
This will be our last question. We're almost at our hour. We got 5 more minutes, so this will be
Okay.
Leslie will wrap it up for us. Council member.
Hey, I appreciate you guys. I'm really proud of all you guys. Don't give up, man. I know, that it's hard, because they are really, the more we try to make it legal, the more they dig in, man. And we just got to go state by state. We're starting to get more states, that are legal. But go ahead. What's the question?
So, being part of the crew of the Grateful Dead was definitely more than a job. I mean, it's a family, it's a
Oh, yeah.
mission. And then everyone
Yep.
who was on tour, like when I was on kind of fish tour for a while, and when tour was over, you have to kind of figure out what to do next. What do you do? And my question is in relation to veterans when their tour, when their mission is over and they're trying to find out what's next and their place in the world. What do you have to say, especially being a part of something that was so much bigger than yourself? And how do you think veterans could incorporate that bigger picture into their life to find place and purpose?
Because, it's a good question because as stoned as we were, as high as we were, and doing that, we always cared about our brothers because Jerry was in the Army, Mickey was in the Air Force, Owsley was in the Air Force and the Navy, and everybody had to deal with that in those days. We were drafted. We didn't have a choice, And so we knew the pain of serving in the military. And plus, we were all raised by the guys that fought World War II. They fucking island hop in the Pacific. They all got, diseases on the ships and on the islands. And everybody that went to Europe fought for their lives, man. The Nazis were tough, man. And they fought and they had a lot of problems. When they came back, they didn't talk much about it, and they raised us to be strong Americans. And when it ended up, our war, Vietnam, didn't make a lick of sense. There was no understanding of anything. So guys were getting fucked up everywhere by it. So we had to deal with that. And they were our friends. And we never turned our backs on them. And we let them come to our studio and have group therapy sessions, man. And they talked and they told their stories and they got it off their chest, because it's such a horrific thing that you have to go through to live that way. But they knew, even in the, they didn't, a lot of guys, what they did long range in Vietnam, you went on long range LERPs, they called them, these long range missions in the middle of darkness of the night, far away from everything. You didn't smoke weed then. But as soon as you got back to base camp, everybody lit up, man. And some guys like to just beer it up. There was rednecks and the hippies fighting all the time. But the cannabis really had a medical value, and it really does something for you. And we knew that. We knew it had value. And so we constantly worked for medical evaluation. I talk about, from my constant reading about everything nonfiction. When the British were in India, I was trying to tell this earlier, a Dr. O'Shaughnessy was working in a hospital in Calcutta. And he said to the Ayurvedic doctors of India, he said, I want to go with you guys. I want to go out and see how you guys use your medicine because Western medicine was so rigid and stiff. This is 1888 in Calcutta. So he follows these doctors on their rounds in the hospital. The first thing they do is they're in this place. There's a baby about 6 months old having an epileptic fit. And the baby was that today, a doctor seeing a baby in full seizure, it's a scary thing. There's nothing they can do. And the Western medicine at that time had no treatment for that. Well, the Ayurvedic doctor opened a drawer, took out a vial, stuck his finger in it, and put it under the baby's tongue. It was hash oil, it was resin. And about 30 seconds later, that baby cooled out. Now, O'Shaughnessy saw that and he began to tell everybody about the amazing medical value of this stuff. And so England had a big flourish in the late 1800s and 90s. Hashish parlors opened up all over the United Kingdom, and they were using it for medicine. And it became, infused into wine. If you read the Bible, and we had sometimes on the road in those early days, there was nothing. You'd be in the Midwest, and the room would be, the TV's off at 11, and there's that Bible, and you start reading it, and you realize, hey, myrrhed wine is wine with cannabis resin in it, and that's what they gave to people that were in great pain. It's one of the great medicines of the world. There's all based on these plants. And cannabis is one of the most important. And they used it for childbirth, they used it for everything. So it naturally became a thing for a warrior to use it to relax. For one thing, the slaves, when they came here from Africa, they all smoked weed and they brought it here to American soil. And the reason being that you didn't get beat like you did if you were drunk. If you drank rum, you couldn't work the next day. You were hangover, or you didn't want to work, or you were sick. But on weed, you could get up and work. And that was what the thing in the Grateful Dead. You could do anything you wanted. There was no restriction. Do whatever you want. But if you drank and were drunk, you couldn't work with us on the crew. It was too dangerous. We didn't care what you did. We partied every night. That was different when back at the hotel. We led a strenuous life, but we knew that all the veterans needed cannabis to smoke because they came back wanting it. And so that really helped to make it a way that we started realizing that it has so much more to it. There's so many sides to this thing. It's not just a stupid stoner thing. It's got real helpful things. Now, some people get a little paranoid on it, and they get strange, but most people find it relaxes them. And if they learn how to use it properly, they have a really healthful time of it. It doesn't cause all these lies they start telling you about you know, I've seen miracles with cannabis, true miracles. And I could talk to you for hours about this because I love it. Todd
Well, let's
Piccaria
do
is,
that. Let's have you back. We're at our hour time. You agreed you could do an hour with us, so let's have you back in the future, and we want to continue our questions with you because we have more questions for you. But we thank you for your time, Big
you
Steve.
can ask me one more question. I got a minute or two here I can fudge on if you want to. If not, I'll be glad to come back.
All right. Well,
Bring me
let's
back.
see. That will be Mike D. Mike, Council Member Mike. You've got the next question. There it is.
Yeah, hang on, man. Okay, yeah. Uh, Hey, man. Thanks for coming on, man. This is really great, man. You're doing a great job, Big Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. So after sorry, just did a just did a dab, man. I'm still coughing it out. So, uh, what does home mean to you after all the years being on the road? I mean, you guys were on, well, you're still on tour, man, because we still
Yeah,
have the new Dead and Co thing coming
that's
up in
right. That's
year
right.
that's coming up. So, and I know last time you were there pretty much in Vegas the whole time. So I mean the tour always is going on, man. There's always something going on, and you always have something going on. I know you're always in, LA, whether it's for, an XM show or, the tour never ends, man. So, what do you consider, I guess, home is the road home, I guess, to you?
Well, you see, it's just like anything. When you're in the jungle, you want to be home. When you're home, you want to be back in the jungle, man. It's sort of like that. You can't, when you spend your whole life, I started when I was, 18 years old, going out all the time and traveling the world, man. What a great thing that was. You learn about cultures all over. You experience things you could never do by sitting at home. But your body sometimes tells you it's time to take a rest. And so even after Jerry died, we kept going and we kept working and we kept inventing new things and going out with other bands. Everybody wanted us with our expertise to come out with them. We were famous, the crew I'm talking about, in that way. Now then, the toll of the life, the heavy life that we led, starts taking a toll on people, and they start passing away and getting real sick, and that kind of stuff affects you. But I always felt like as long as we had a purpose to bring music to people, that's a pretty good thing. And it gives you back to your soul. It makes you feel good to bring and see the smiles on people's faces when they're at shows. So you put up with all that. People don't have any idea. A lot of people will look at and say, they had no idea about what it took to make a show. All they do is come in and see the show and then go home. They don't understand about all this 360 stuff. It's a very hard life. It's not easy. When people say, "Oh, I wish I could," you guys have it so easy. I'd like to go with you guys. You fly in private planes. You do all this. I said, "Yeah, but you couldn't take the hours. First of all, let me tell you, you got to be up all day and all night, and then you party. You got to party because that's part of it. So all those things give you some crazy things. It's hard to settle down, man. But you got to have, in order to do that lifestyle, you got to have a good home base to come back to. And as long as you have that, you can do it. But I'm starting to taper off. I'm getting up there now. I'm 105 years old, man. And so it's time to slow down a bit. But the thing is that I don't want to. I feel the strength that I get from it. And that's what I'm tapped into, Mike. And I'm not going to stop until we get somewhere with this thing where the whole country is free on cannabis. That'll tell me that we really have true freedom because that's what this thing is about. It's about freedom and the pursuit of happiness. That's the real thing. And that's my goal. And I know yours too. you know, I could go on and tell so many stories. We got written up by the DEA. We were followed by the FBI. But we weren't stupid enough as to bring drugs and sell them to people. Of course not. We didn't need to. We never stopped experimenting with ourselves, because that's part of it. But the whole thing is a learning experience every day of my life, man. I wouldn't have traded for anything. I was lucky enough to be with Jerry in both bands that he had, and it was like a gift. It was a gift to be with that guy. And he ran a missile site when he was in the army. He thought he was going to get shipped to Germany or something because he was a juvenile delinquent like we all were, but he ended up. They put him in the Presidio, and he was right there in San Francisco. So he went AWOL every Friday and went for the whole weekend. And man, he finally got a dishonorable discharge. And it's this thing where you had to do your duty, but you also wanted to find. You had this chance to have a life that took you traveling the world, but you didn't have to carry a rifle with you all the time. You know what I mean? It was like you're there on the fun zone. that's something really special. Meeting people from all cultures and partying with people. And then you see there's no enemies then. Everybody can get along, man. And it bridges the gap. If you smoke weed with somebody, you're friends, maybe friends for life sometimes. So all that stuff, I miss it, the camaraderie and all that stuff. But I still got a taste of it. The ranks are getting thin, man. They are getting thin. But Bobby, Mickey, we stay in touch. We pride each other's memories of things that happened, tell stories. We were joined together by this beautiful thing. But going on the road, that's what wears you out. And we started, like I say, we drove everywhere. We had to do everything on foot. We had to find our way around. Then we got to the point where we had our own planes. And, that's a whole other way. You're staying in the finest hotels. We tried to make it as comfortable as possible,
Leslie?
but it's still travel.
Leslie's got a follow up.
Yeah, I mean, I keep feeling like there's the last tour and there's not going to be any more shows. And here,
I don't
back
think that's ever going to happen, Les,
back at
because
this back at the Sphere, and I have to ask. I mean, like, how does that venue? I mean, does that venue just blow y'all's mind?
well, it's different. It's very different. The PA is different in there. The whole thing is a visual experience that's so insane that was like watching my life flash before me on this giant screen. But as far as um, you know, it's so different because the band is far away on this little stage. They're not lit up at all. Everything is what's going on around. So it's a very different experience. I like just the regular touring, act without any of that stuff because it was really easy. The guys are getting on in age now, and so it was beautiful to stay in one place and everybody come there. That's sort of your dream, and it's a follow up thing to what Mike was asking me. Yeah, going on the road is great, but when you get older, it's tougher and tougher. It wears you out traveling. And basically you're trapped out there. You got to do stupid stuff to get by, and that's the danger zone. So when you're at a place like Las Vegas, oh my God, you got to really watch yourself, or that place will eat you alive. So being that the Sphere is there now, Las Vegas has become the entertainment capital of the world. It was really nice to see the Sphere, and when I saw our logo on that big Sphere out there, I couldn't believe it because it was like telling me everybody, all the people that were on the crew, all the people in the band, so many are dead now. And they gave everything they had to rock and roll, and they didn't get to enjoy it. So I go there to enjoy it for everybody. You know what I'm saying? And so I love meeting the people. I was doing radio up there, and people were coming, thousands of people a day, telling me what my show meant to them. Because I've now become somebody who tries to keep this beautiful scene alive for the young people that come in. There's still people that weren't even born when Jerry was alive, but they love it. They love this thing, and that's a beautiful thing. And so the Sphere represents that because that's where everybody. It's the epitome of showbiz now to go there. So for that stuff and the awards at the Kennedy Center and the Grammy awards that came to them for lifetime achievements, this was a beautiful thing to see that our whole work, all the work we did so hard, meant something to people. And so that's the real payoff right there. You might make a lot of money, you might not, but the thing is, the satisfaction of having successful, safe shows is what the Grateful Dead was about, and have a good time. I
Well,
guess that's it. I could
yeah.
go on and on and on.
Well, we'll would love to have you back again to do so. So, thank you, Steve Parish. You can catch more of Big Steve. He is on XM23 satellite radio on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Pacific and 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Big Steve Hour. So, I'd like to thank our council members, Mike Davis, Coney Tony Landry, Leslie Fries, Mike Crowitz, myself, Etienne Fontaine, and our guest, Steve Parish. Yeah, we'll have to update you, Steve. We're actually going to be, a couple of us are heading to the United Nations because we're working on the world issue for
Good,
cannabis.
good.
And we'll be happy to update you. And hopefully, we're going above the U.S. because we're tired of
Yeah,
waiting. So
yep,
we're
yep.
just putting the foot on the accelerator and going on the road. So we'll keep you posted on things go. And I can't thank you enough for joining us. And we look forward to the next time. So thank you, everybody, for V.A.C.
Well, I thank
Roundtable.
you guys for having me. I really thank you, ATN, and everybody. You guys are great,
Steve, do
and
you have
I'm
anything to
honored.
promote?
I'm honored.
Do you have anything to promote?
Well, you said about my show, and Weir and I are working on a TV show that reminisces our lives on the road. Me being the youngest crew guy, he being the youngest band member, we've stayed very close friends. So those things are in the progress, things like that. There's a couple of other ideas of moving into different parts of communication to people. You know, I was doing a YouTube channel, but I've kind of hung that up for a little bit. I'm going to go back to it because I want to keep it fresh. I want to change it. I was telling stories, and I appreciate all the help that you guys give everybody. You guys are great. And we're in this together, man. We're all brothers of the cannabis tribe, man. And that's a beautiful thing. I'm really proud of you guys.
Well, thank you for carrying your torch, and we'll carry our torches forward together. So, and carry
All
that
right.
light forward, right? All right.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, for joining
Thanks.
us for our V.A.C. Roundtable number 87. It's been Big Steve Parish and an amazing show. So, thank you much, everybody. Have a great rest of your night.